Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If I haven't met you already, I'm Megan. I'm at WCMC and I lead the project from our side. I think you've received an email from us that hopefully we can get to know each other a bit better throughout the day. So I'm just going to very briefly kind of introduce the project, or we will be doing this through the session. It's going to be quite sort of broad, but hopefully we can keep discussing it throughout the day as well. First, we're going to have some introductions from David Gibbons at CCI and then David Thomas from ELP on the project as well, before my colleagues will come in and go through what we've been doing over the past year and a half now. So David.
Thank you, Megan. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Gibbons and I'm the Interim Executive Director of CCI. I've been doing this job for about 3 months, probably will be doing it for another 6 months, and we hope to recruit a new Executive Director, a permanent one, in the spring next year. And my job today is the very pleasant one of simply welcoming you to this workshop. Now, some of you are familiar with CCI, some are less so. So for those of you that don't know, CCI is a conservation collaboration. It's 10 conservation organisations and the University of Cambridge. Each of those organisations has their own networks, their own strategies. And what CCI does is it collaborates across those organisational boundaries in areas of common interest, both formally and informally, to try to do more for nature conservation. We're about 16 years old, and we've been in this building for 6 or 7 years. This building is the headquarters for some of those organisations involved in CCI, but it's satellite offices for others. And it was designed as a collaborative space. So there's spaces which are for office space for those organisations, and there's shared spaces like this where we are now. One of our great strengths, we like to think, is convening power. It's convening meetings exactly like this, involving not only CCI partners, but also many other organisations to discuss the issues of the day. So it's great to be having events like this more and more. We had a period where we didn't have many because of COVID, of course, but now we're coming out of that and having these face-to-face meetings, which is fantastic. Now, I wrote up there knowledge and understanding as one of my main reasons for being here today, personally, and I'm here to learn. So I can recall the whole idea of carbon markets and voluntary carbon markets being discussed maybe 15 years or so ago. And if I'm entirely honest, in those early discussions, it was always jam tomorrow. Funding is coming. Don't worry, guys. We'll keep working. Funding will come, but it never seemed to. But now it is. And that's a big change over the last, well, even 5 to 10 years. And it's great to see that happening. And it's nice to know that money really is coming into the conservation and the restoration sphere from these markets. And clearly there are big benefits, but there are also big risks, and there are quite a number of barriers in the way. You know, in the early stages of this kind of voluntary carbon market and carbon markets in general, I kind of just about barely understood, I was kind of hanging on by my fingertips at understanding this whole area. And then a whole bunch of other complex stuff got logged in, like additionality and leakage and all that, and I completely failed to understand it, and I kind of lost my understanding. So today what I really want to do is to re-engage with that and try to understand it again. And I hope all of you learn something new today, and whatever you do, enjoy the day and have a great time. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. A few additional words of welcome from me. I'm David Thomas. I'm Director of the Endangered Landscapes Programme. You'll see a logo on your badges, and really I'm here just to start to tell you a little bit about the programme and set the context of where we're coming from as a programme to this issue. So the programme, it has a vision of restoring ecosystems, biodiversity, habitats, and ecosystem processes at landscape scale within Europe. So that's its high-level vision. And it does that primarily through the provision of large grants, fairly large grants, up to $5 million. And we're supporting restoration in about 14 landscapes across Europe at the moment. And it's doing this in recognition, really, of the challenges that we face with issues of biodiversity loss, ecosystem fragmentation, and the associated climate crisis in Europe. And the failure really to have addressed this through many of the conservation approaches that have taken place in Europe over the last 30 years or so, and a kind of realization that we need to start working at landscape scale. But in addition, we need to really move on from conservation to restoration as well, to bring back some of the biodiversity and ecosystems that have been lost. So that's where it sits as a programme. We're supporting projects, as I say, from the Cairngorms of Scotland, Caledonian Pine Forests. We're lucky enough to have Jeremy Roberts here, the programme manager of that project, to steppe grasslands in Georgia, to marine ecosystems off the coast of Turkey, to Montado dry forests in Portugal. So very wide, diverse set of ecosystems. So one of the kind of common challenges that all of those projects face really is how to sustain that level of activity restoration in the long term. So we're providing, which in the conservation world are reasonably large grants, but they're for 5 or 6 years, but restoration is a long-term process. So all of our projects grappling with that. And not surprisingly, they've looked with some level of optimism at the opportunities that voluntary carbon markets and now voluntary biodiversity markets might provide them. But that optimism, once they kind of dip their toe in the water, very quickly turned to a degree of pessimism, certainly struggling to deal with the complexities that surround this whole area. So we as a programme then started working very closely with UNET WCMC, so Megan, who you all know, and RSPB, to explore what could be done to increase understanding and build capacity of our grantees to help them through some of these barriers. I would say that some of the work as well that Megan and Rob at RSPB have done has looked at the carbon benefits from our projects, and it's considerable. I mean, it's really it's significant, which is what you would expect from large land-scale restoration projects. But then bringing those benefits to market is where the challenge has been. So, I mean, what we're going to be doing today, I hope, is actually exploring with you as individuals involved in different parts of the voluntary carbon market, what those barriers are and how they might be overcome. And certainly, as someone who's leading this program, we're very, very interested in the outcomes of those conversations so that we can start to support our projects and help them to engage and start to secure the long-term funding of the scale that's needed to restore Europe's landscapes. So I'll say no more. I think I'm handing back to Megan now. No? Okay, right. Thank you.
David. My name is Maria. I work at UNET WCMC, and I'm one of the members of the project team. And we'll first kind of tell you a little bit about project findings and some of the outputs we've produced over the 2 years that it's gone on. And starting with a little bit of the background, not too much because all of you here already know the challenges of landscape restoration in Europe. So a lot of landscapes are degraded, and while there is increasing global ambition as well as national commitment and mandate to restore the degraded landscapes across the world, in Europe, lack of funding is a major barrier to scaling up, and it is hoped that carbon finance could potentially provide some of that funding and the funding pipeline to make sure financing is secured for long term. So a lot of the landscape restoration of European habitats could potentially also have a co-benefit of climate mitigation, including restoration of degraded peatlands or introducing natural grazers that reduces wildfire risk, seagrass restoration, and other interventions. And so one of the first stages of our project was talking to a lot of restoration practitioners from the ELP and some outside the ELP to kind of measure the temperature of the room, of how familiar people are with carbon markets, what they see as potential pitfalls, what they see as challenges of accessing those markets. So some of the common questions were securing financing to even develop a carbon project. What is a good price of a carbon credit? How do we avoid kind of being forced into a price that doesn't suit the project goals? How do we keep our integrity? Who do we engage with? Which stakeholders of the market are important to engage with? And what other options available? What are the different carbon standards out there? What are their requirements? So some of the kind of global carbon market standards that most of you may be familiar with, they don't actually work in Europe. So Europe is actually a big blank spot for the most part when it comes to the market leaders like Vera VCS or gold standards. And some standards out there don't even work in Europe at all. They only focus on North America. And NBS is only NBS, a nature-based solution. When we talk about nature-based solutions in the carbon context, it's carbon credits that are produced on land, so kind of land-based carbon credits. They only make up a fraction of the global market for carbon credits. So some of the standards don't even work with such projects. They only work with carbon capture through technology, for example. So to kind of bridge the lag, bridge the gap and account for the lag that Europe is experiencing when it comes to global carbon markets, we've discovered that there are a lot of national or ecosystem-specific standards or schemes in Europe that are either already in, they're already working, or they are piloting, or they're being conceptualized right now. So we spoke with some of these standards and reviewed kind of their requirements. But as you can see, again, there's a limitation there, is that they're mostly in Western Europe. So the question remains, how do people outside that region, projects outside that region, take advantage of carbon finance? So one of the outputs we've produced is a carbon standard database, which includes the global schemes and the national schemes for carbon credits. We've reviewed the different requirements and kind of the angle of what can I access as a project that focuses on restoration and is based in Europe. So that kind of narrows the list down quite a lot. And it should be said that this is a really highly evolving kind of space, and the database isn't finite. It's the standards in it and the standards that are being developed, they're constantly updating. So it can be kind of used as a starting point for projects looking at carbon finance as a potential source of finance for the projects. And another of the project outputs we produced is kind of a set of case studies looking at specific ecosystems that can be found in Europe, such as forest, grassland, peatland, and what are the specific barriers experienced by projects working to restore those habitats. So we spoke with a few projects, kind of some of them are already market ready almost, some of them are being registered with the standard, some are finding that it's actually quite difficult to find a methodology that is accepted. And Next, I'll hand over to Collie, who is going to talk about the carbon project cycle.
Thank you. The diagram you see here shows process of developing a carbon project. The process can be very complex because there are different stakeholders involved in the process. It can take very long. So it usually start project owners interested in developing a carbon project when they sell carbon. The owners can be restoration practitioners. But in most cases, they might not have the capacity to develop a carbon project, to sell the project, also to manage it. So at times they will seek knowledge from consultants or funding developers for the carbon project. So if they don't have the capacity to develop a carbon project, they will seek knowledge from consultants or project developers to develop a project. But the carbon projects usually should be based on a carbon standard. The carbon standard set the methodologies for monitoring the project, but also to design the entire carbon project. And those methodologies and monitoring activities are verified by third-party auditors. They verify the project design document that demonstrate compliance to the requirements of the carbon standard, but also verify the resource, the carbon that be removed or reduced during the entire carbon process. So when the credits have been verified, then buyers, they have the opportunity to buy carbon credits on the project owners, the project developers. They can use the carbon credits to offset their emissions in the supply chains, or they can decide to sell it to another person. So like Maria said, we have conversation with different stakeholders regarding the different questions or different concerns on how to engage in a carbon project. So based on these questions, we develop a primer for ecosystem restoration practitioners on limitations and opportunity to assess voluntary carbon markets. So this document will hopefully help to address different questions around barriers, but also integrity, the social buying carbon credits, but the different stages of engaging landowners, but different stakeholders, to ensure that stakeholders are aware of the proposed interventions and that they are aware of how the revenue from carbon will be distributed and be distributed fairly. So one of the things we actually look at in the project is key elements, but also potential questions that people got concerned about when developing carbon projects. So we developed a simple decision tree for carbon project enthusiasts to actually look at when we do carbon projects. There are different stages of the process and ask different questions to get clarity, additionality, but also ownership of carbon in terms of financial viability of the project. So one of the values we think people should actually be aware of is the full cost of the carbon project, see whether the carbon project is viable. So when our we develop costing to that cost a hypothetical project through the different stages that was shown on the first slide. It's called different stages of the carbon project. The cost of the entire project, see whether the carbon project is viable, but also whether it has the potential to reduce emissions, but also remove carbon from the atmosphere, so that it means the kind of quality integrity that we expect on the carbon market. So I tell you. Next slide.
Yeah, my name's Sally Ashby, and I work with Tom Stevens here for Fauna and Flora in the Climate and Nature Linkages team. And our sort of input into this project was focusing on the finance and the legal and the policy aspects of this, trying to access carbon finance. and I'm sure you're all aware of the gaps. Everything seems to be about the gaps. A vast financial gap between what needs to be done and what's actually being done, but also more significantly, a gap between projects on the ground and investment. And everyone, I mean, even the president of the Rockefeller Foundation at Climate Week in New York said, you know, the time for talking about this is kind of over. You know, we need to just do the investment and do the transactions. And as much as I'd like to be sort of optimistic that yes, the finance is coming, the reality is it isn't at the scale or the speed that is needed. So it feels like there's a lot of willingness from the investor side, but actually that needs to translate into finance on the ground to projects. So, I mean, on the upside, since Climate Week, you know, there's this sense that nature is actually very much more prominent in the climate space. So one hopes that nature-based solutions and the climate finance going towards them will increase, because currently it's only 2%. So from a sort of to dig more into what this gap, not just the finance gap, the disconnect between projects and private finance. Why is that? And how can we help address that in a practical way? And so that's what this part of the tool is about enabling project managers to get a grip on the finance side of things at the most, you know, first step level. So we basically worked on a tool that is a costing tool, project costing tool. So project managers can access this, download an Excel spreadsheet, and ultimately they can use this. It's basically a cost-based model for your carbon project, effectively. So for your restoration project, and you'll put in the various pieces of information, but there are certain pieces of information that require a lot of technical understanding. So, for example, the actual emissions reduction or removal, and that's where you see with projects, you know, how do you do your carbon accounting? And that can prove expensive. You need consultants. How do you know, what restoration interventions, how that translates into actual emissions reductions? And you can prove that over time and have that funded. And so what you will basically, this tool, and there's a whole guidance within the guidance on the website to go with it, but ultimately over time, and this will be an iterative process as you gather more information, whether it be financial or relating to emissions reductions, is you will build up what is a cost-based model of your project over time, and you will get a cash flow output. And what you'll end up with, now this is, in the venture capital world, they call a J curve, and that's the valley of death at the bottom here, where basically you as a restoration project manager, you're going to be implementing, doing all these things, feasibility assessment, early implementation, monitoring, verifying, and validating, and then verifying. And when you get to credit issuance, that's basically where this valley of death finally hits the line. And that's where your credit issuance starts, and you get revenue from the actual credits. So how are you going to survive the valley of death? And that's what most projects can't do. And it's what most investors don't want to invest in terms of restoration, because they think it's high risk, low profitability, you know, and there's not that historical data, because what we're doing is quite new. So what it requires is leadership on both sides. So it requires project managers and restoration managers to step out of comfort zones and actually start dealing and entering into a bit more of the financial world. Understanding the financial reality. I mean, that is, if there isn't enough public money, we have to access private finance. So how do we do it? We have to do it in a way that we don't take on risk. as projects. And that is really where, if you start looking, you have projects that get to a point where they realize they're feasible, they have additionality, they're like, okay, we have a working project here, let's talk about finance. And that's where you hit this kind of rocky ground of investors not wanting risk and projects not actually being able to deal with any risk. Most projects are sort of on a shoestring as it is. So how do you share that risk? And that boils down to your negotiations and your contracts. And that, I'm sure there's a lot of experience and expertise in the room that we'll be digging into more. But ultimately, it kind of, I chose this slide just because it's like, not everyone's a shark. So, I think where there has to be a question of building trust between project managers and investors to ask questions, build that financial literacy in the project side of things, but also build conservation literacy from the investor side. And to really tell your restoration story, there is more funding from corporates than there are from asset managers currently. And corporates, if your project is in a geography and a business kind of presence there, you have a lot more chance with corporates. So yeah, know your project's worth, and the idea of we've just got to sort of do this, but it means something quite radical and different. So yeah, that's it. And over.
Thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Rob Field. I work in the Centre for Conservation Science at RSPB. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about risk. So we've heard that there are quite a lot of opportunities, but that markets are and can seem very complex, opaque, and it's fraught with pitfalls. And some are and some aren't. And I apologise in advance for this slide for those who are colourblind that I didn't think about when I put this together. So see me afterwards and I'll obviously. So there are potential benefits, as we've heard. There's the potential to bring about significant source of funding which can have quite a lot of diversity within it, to incentivize local land managers to engage in changing practices, to develop private sector partnerships, all these things. But there are potentially quite a lot of cons to doing this, quite a lot of barriers. The complexity of the markets, the fact that you'll need a lot of extra knowledge and capacity in order to develop projects, restoration and MRV, so measurement, reporting and verification methodologies can be complex, or indeed they can be very lacking for certain habitats and certain types of management. There are issues around restoration permanence and additionality. And a lot of these things, the ones that particularly I've highlighted in red, are all down to, in some way linked to this overarching thing called MRV. The idea that the integrity of these credits, the value of them, the reputation of them, is all down to the ability to measure reliably and verify that removals or avoidance of emissions to the atmosphere has actually happened. And this not only applies to carbon itself, but also to the co-benefits that you might want to be selling along that give extra value. Those biodiversity, socioeconomic benefits of local ownership, control and management of habitats. You need to be able to prove that they're happening, to show that what you're selling to people is actually real. So along with this comes the associated risks that you can't do that. So the mitigation of these real or perceived risks and their effect on your reputation or the reputation of people that are buying them. And we've already seen in some of the feedback that we've got already, the risks of this emerging market.
and just the whole thing being seen as greenwashing, particularly with recent publicity of Guardian articles and research a particular type of credits. It's all to do with whether you're actually selling something that's real, both now or in the future. But we must recognise in mitigation of these risks that not all credits are the same. They are based on different biophysical mechanisms. They are happening in different habitats. They are ex ante, so they're going to happen in the future. They are real, or they are avoiding things actually happening. They are selling things that have already happened. So there's different ways of accounting these and selling different things. So they're not all the same. The way that they are measured can vary hugely. And one other risk that I think is important here is not directly related to this, but also the risk of whether you get dragged down the route of majoring on carbon rather than the carbon restoration. So it's all about the carbon because that is the major thing that you can sell, rather than ecosystem restoration. So it's carbon as part of a change in an ecosystem, which is sometimes harder to measure, but also can be very valuable. As I remember a workshop we had 18 months ago where this was described as charismatic carbon. So you might not be getting the biggest potential amount of carbon possible from your ecosystem, but you're getting lots of other stuff surrounding it, which can increase either the MRV, the actual real benefit, or the perceived benefit. There's risks that you can mitigate in a failure from due diligence, selling to the wrong people. I've got a carbon credit, who wants it? And everybody's money is the same. But that potentially has a risk, particularly related to greenwashing. But you can mitigate that. You can do your due diligence. You can sell to people who are already on a trajectory with their business or their wider philosophy that is reducing their environmental footprint, be that carbon or other things as well. And so they're really interested in mitigating the very last residual emissions that they have within their organisation, not people who want to carry on doing exactly as they've been doing for the last 100 years, but want to be able to say that they're carbon neutral. So they're going to appear very differently in the public domain. And obviously there is a risk that you engage in this market and you arse it up, basically. Incomplete adherence to standards, using the wrong standard and that kind of stuff. But with information, you can avoid that one quite easily. And that's what we're trying to help people navigate their way through this. And the most important thing is when you start out is to understand what you don't understand and know where you've got to get skilled up. And I've alluded to this already, the perfect buyers and sellers. So if you're a seller, you want to be able to assess very well what you've got to sell, and that's benefits beyond carbon, to find the best and most reputable methodologies and standards under which to sell, to have total involvement of the people on the ground who are involved in it, the people who live in these systems, the people who use them, and sustainable projects. If we talk about the broader meaning of that word sustainable, if they're sustainable financially, if they're sustainable socially, socioeconomically, and that kind of thing, they're less likely to be reversed. So they are you're able to, as much as you can within a biological system, to ensure permanence. But on the other hand, if you do your due diligence, you can find buyers who are actively reducing their emissions, are socially responsible, their values are aligned with the sort of thing that you're trying to do, and they're willing to pay for this more charismatic carbon. and have a genuine long-term interest in partnering with your project. So the credit is the vehicle to a much deeper relationship. So in terms of MRV, so measurement, reporting and verification, there are lots of options, but it's the golden thread, I hate that term, but I'm going to use it anyway, that runs through the whole project. You have to know how it works when you design your project so that you know that you're going to have to sell and that you can quantify it and show that it's real. And so that's one of the things you need to get aligned with right from the very start to understand what you're doing. And guiding principles that if you've got all that, you have some integrity to it and you have co-benefits that you can also measure and verify. And that it's financially viable. So you don't spend all your credit money on designing and measuring it, and there's nothing actually left as a benefit for the people on the ground in order to pay for the work up front that you've got to do in order to pay for more conservation. So you need to do this sort of homework before you start. And Sally's costing tool helps you to do that. But obviously, there is still a lot to know before you do this in order to make these decisions. And some of the stuff that we were talking about this afternoon is this, what are the barriers and trade-offs between cost, the ease of which to do it, how much it costs to do it, and how much that integrity is valuable to your credit in designing that and in project planning and deciding whether to do it at that stage or in the delivery of your project. And also, what opportunities or recommendations would you have as practitioners at various points in that project process, be you providing them or buying them or enabling other people to do it, for overcoming the sort of barriers of cost, of perception, of integrity? Do we need to, what recommendations do we have for future action in order to unlock the potential of these markets, to enable as many people as possible where it is the right thing to do to actually unlock funding for their ecosystem or landscape restoration? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for that quick overview. And I think hopefully that shows the breadth of things that we've been exploring. Obviously, it's quite brief, but if you go online to our project site on the ELP website, you'll see that we produced lots of outputs because there's just so much to explore. So hopefully you can have a look at those. And if you do have any feedback, we'd be very happy to hear it. And I'd also like to thank all the people who throughout the project we've been interviewing. So that included project practitioners themselves, but also experts all across the spectrum of the carbon market, and who let us just interview them for hours to find out all the information that they know. Yeah, so hopefully this also shows that we've been exploring some of those challenges that you were suggesting earlier in the day as well. And our next few sessions should also help us to explore that in a bit more depth as well. And particularly looking at how we can overcome them, what the opportunities are, and to hear from yourselves, because everyone in the room is very much an expert, even if you maybe don't feel like it all the time. Next up we have a panel discussion. So this will be starting at 11 o'clock promptly. We just need a bit of time to set up. Sorry, 12. Lost track. 12 o'clock promptly. So for those in the room, that gives you a time for a quick break. So if you want to grab more coffee or go to the loo. For the person who said they're hungry, please see me. I can kill snacks. So thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to the rest of the day as well.